So what is kombucha? It's a fermented tea, simple as that. It's rich in B vitamins, and I say probiotics here based on what I just said to you earlier with a little quote unquote maybe. Tea, sugar, and then something called a SCOBY, which is a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. Now, I want to tell you something that I just really either just learned today or maybe just was reminded of today, that the SCOBY is actually the part that is in your starter tea. It's all that bacteria and yeast. It's also in the pancake, or the thing that floats on top, the thing that is here. But these things, and I've done it too. I call this the SCOBY. Fact is, what I learned today is you can brew this without this. This is called a pellicle. This thing that rides on top, that is the mushroom that is formed. It's not even a mushroom. It's the mat that forms over the top of your kombucha as you're brewing it, is something that's starting to gather the yeast and the bacteria, and it makes a mat of it. But in all honesty, it's the stronger tea once it gets going and it's brewed to its fullest that has the strands of bacteria and yeast in it, or the bacteria and the strands of yeast in it that are really called the SCOBY. So if you have that, you don't need a pellicle. So I have not tried that yet, but I'm going to, because it would be great to not have to have a SCOBY hotel. This is a SCOBY hotel. We've always called it this, but it's really like a pellicle hotel. Weird words, huh? And you can keep them alive, or you can keep them happy and healthy by just adding more sweet tea to them, and they eat that. That's the process. Sweet sugar tea is what kombucha bacteria and yeast feed on to create this acetic acid fermentation. So what do you think about that, Vivian? You're a long time brewer. Is that new information for you too?
I'd never heard of that pellicle.
Yeah,
like,
now that
that?
I had heard of before, huh?
Is that what's called when they typically they'll say, well, it makes another SCOBY. Is that what the pellicle is?
Yes, that mat, this thing that's in here floating around, those are pellicles.
Okay.
And they are technically, I mean, they do have a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast in it, but not as much as the tea itself, the fermented tea. So that I found very interesting. And does it help? It might help. I would maybe think it would be interesting to do an experiment where you did one jar with a pellicle and one without, all other things being equal. It might be interesting to see what happens there. But here are
also maybe use it as a starter, like, you know, in the colony, like, and then you add it to other.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's what you would think. That's what I always thought we were doing here. But then it did make me wonder, now that I think about it, well, why did we need this and starter tea?
Right.
Why would we only just be able to put in, why couldn't we just put in a pellicle if that was the case?
Right.
So the starter tea is really where it's at. But be careful when you're looking for starter tea. I think I might have told the class last time that I tried to get some starter tea at the grocery store. GT is one brand, and they would sell a what was it called? It's an unflavored brand. It's just your what's the word I'm trying to think of? It's got a blue label.
Pure?
No, it's just the regular type. It has no flavor whatsoever in, and you really should use no flavor at all in your starter tea. You don't want anything that's got ginger in it or fruit or anything like that. You want a pure starter tea, which is why it's kind of good to have if you get yourself a culture. And Pat asked, where can you get a culture? You can try Cultures for Health. That would be one place. You can also try that Facebook Kombucha Nation. There will be people there who will send you pellicles and SCOBY starter tea. They always send the pellicle with the starter tea, so you're ready to go. And those people I would think, especially if you follow them a little bit or check into some of their other posts, you can get an idea as to whether they're brewing responsibly and feel pretty good about that. But they should have a list of people who have those available. But as a
I'm sorry,
fallback,
Deb, I'm sorry, I joined late. Is it similar to like the whey on a good organic yogurt for like a bread starter to pump that up a little bit? That's, I'm told, is a starter like help and probiotic too.
yeah, so we were talking about different kinds of fermentation, and the kind of fermentation that is happening with a sourdough starter is lactic acid fermentation. So it's a
Okay.
whole different set of bacteria that get in there and work on the flour. And then in the kombucha, it's acetic acid fermentation, and that's a whole different set of yeast and bacteria that work on the sugars. They're all working on sugars in the original ingredient, whether it's flour or grape juice or
Sweet tea.
in this case tea, but they work in different ways. Yeah.
I apologize.
So-
That's
No worries, that's all right. I'm sure somebody else had a similar question. So what equipment do you need? What resources? First of all, here's a good book I didn't mention the last time. If you're really interested in fermentation overall, different types of fermentation, the NOMA Guide to Fermentation is sort of an industry standard and can be really helpful to you. But there is a lot, and I'll send you a link to a page that I think is pretty good, although they say that, yeah, I have it here. I'll show it to you. They use the word SCOBY instead of pellicle too. So it's common that this is what we call the mat. We call it a SCOBY. So anyway, glass jars or a fermenting crock, but you've got to be really careful with a fermenting crock. You don't want anything that could leach lead. So you've got to have something that is not ceramic, not unglazed anyway. It has to be suitable for fermenting. But glass jars are really the best. You want to stay away from metal. That can leave off tastes. You don't want to use metal in your stirring or anything like that. You can use a wooden spoon. Now, I did read today again that you have to be careful with wooden spoons too, because they can harbor things that you introduce in here that could cause contamination. So if you're going to use a wooden spoon, get one that you're dedicating only to your kombucha, or use a plastic spoon and a plastic funnel, no metal. And then bottles, so you can use these Grolsch bottles. These are really nice for the second ferment because they get a nice tight fit. And eventually these little rubber rings will wear out. So you can buy replacements for those.